the Lords will do its job, which is to review and revise. And there are a fair number of lawyers who take a very clear view in relation to it. Some will take offence at what they may view as
onto M1.
concerned. It's the Prime Minister making clear what he wants to achieve.
And when you say the Lords will do, in T.S. Eliot's phrase from Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, the Lords will do as they do, and there's no doing anything about it. What will the Lords do? What happens in the Lords? Because I think some people watching and listening today might think the Lords are a kind of obstacle. What they really do is, get stuck in the works and put their tuppence halfpenny worth in and slow everything down frightfully. When you say you will do as you're intended to do and as you're meant to do, what is it? What will you do?
Yeah, it's a fair question. Our job is to review and revise. And there's general consent amongst those people who look at the Constitution now that the Commons does not look at legislation in the way that it did when I was an MP, sadly 30 years ago. But to say the Lords looks at legislation in detail, it will consider the position. We have experts on the subject, human rights lawyers, people who've themselves been fled. Alf Dubs is the most obvious example, who was one of the Jewish children brought from out of Austria in the Second World War years. So we have a real range of experts, and we will use that expertise to look at the legislation in detail, which, to be honest, the Commons should do.
And have you not had ample time to do this in advance, just so the whole thing can shuffle along a bit? Because if you start from scratch with something so infinitely complicated, how long is it going to take, for God's sake?
Well, we don't know how long it's going to take. We will do a process. The government whips in the Lords will no doubt keep us here for a fair length of time. I think it's worth noting that in general the Lords sit for later hours than the Commons does on a very regular basis, because we look at things in detail. No, the legislation went to the Commons. It's been dealt with apace, to say the least. We will deliberate on it, and we will deliberate in full. But it may mean that we sit very late hours, and the Lords is willing to do that because it recognises that matters have to go back to the Commons and for further consideration thereafter, if necessary.
Lord Hayward, virtually everybody in the country must have a view on the Rwanda bill by now, because it's been front and centre of the news. I should know. I'm presenting it every day, or every day I think we might be able to do something else, and every day here we are yet again discussing Rwanda, despite petitions from me saying, oh my God, not again, please don't, let's discuss it again. So there it is, and we can't get away from it whatever happens, even though, of course, the president of Rwanda has said you can have the money back if it's not going to work out, have the cash, and loads of people will have thought, yeah, let's grab it. So you must have a view on what you might be going to say. I realise you haven't examined the minutiae yet.
I'm sorry.
How do you think you feel about it?
I very much doubt that you could actually even tell me what Clause 1 said, let alone Clause 2 or Clause 3 or Clause 4.
Well, much too boring to read those clauses, Lord Hayward, isn't it?
But that's what our job is to look at the different clauses, to look at the implications. I'm in support of the principle of the idea of introducing a system that is a deterrent to illegal migration and the use of gangs to get people across the channel. There's no question, that's my broad position. But you look at any piece of legislation and say, does this by chance have implications for fill in the blank? And to do that, you have to look at things very, very carefully indeed. You can't just say, oh yeah, we'll give the government complete power, it can draft a bill, and this, you'd be handing over utter chaos. I was Chief Executive of the Beer and Pub Association before I came in here. There were licensing legislation which hadn't been carefully reviewed, with all sorts of consequences because it hadn't been carefully reviewed. Now, the Rwanda bill is much more important in terms of constitutional matters, and all legislation has to be considered carefully.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme. Good to see you. Let's bring in Elizabeth Fitzgerald. Well, we see there that Lord Hayward and his colleagues are certainly not going to be hustled or harangued or harassed into rushing anything through, regardless of Rishi Sunak's eagerness to get this whole thing finished and done and dusted, are they?
Well, Lord Hayward actually mentioned a really important point, and we could end up with what we call Parliament ping-pong. So now the bill is going to go to the House of Lords. They have a chance to scrutinise it, much in the same way that we've just seen in the House of Commons.